それではお待たせいたしました。これより TE-05 パネルディスカッション、エンタープライズ企業はいかにクラウド化の流れを進めるべきかを開演いたします。パネリストは Amazon Web Services ヘッドオブエンタープライズストラテジー、スティーブン・オーバン、そして Amazon Web Services プリンシパルソリューションズアーキテクト、ミハ・クラーリ、そして Amazon Web Services ディレクター AWS リスク&コンプライアンス、チャド・ウルフ、そしてモデレーターは Amazon データサービスジャパン株式会社事業開発本部本部長安田俊彦です。それではお願いいたします。
皆さんこんにちは。
Good afternoon, my name is Yasuda from Amazon. Today, we are going to have the Fireside Chat. It's different from the general panel discussion, but in a more casual environment, how the global companies, enterprises are using the AWS cloud. So how the discussion goes is actually how the enterprises are adapting and utilizing cloud. We would like to go along with that path. Before starting to adopt cloud, what kind of value do they try to identify? And when starting to migrate to cloud, what are the workload that they identify to migrate, and what are the processes they go through, and what are the blockers in adapting and migrating to cloud? And finally, what are the roles of the partners and system integrators in terms of migration to cloud? So first, from each of the panels, I would like them to introduce themselves, followed by the responses to what kind of values they try to identify.
Could you start?
Konnichiwa. My name is Stephen Orban, and I joined AWS last September as the head of enterprise strategy. And prior to joining AWS, I was the CIO at Dow Jones. And over the course of the several years that I spent there, we did some pretty substantial IT transformation, largely led by some of the things that we were doing in the cloud. And AWS was the centerpiece of a lot of that transformation. And I think, about a year ago, it became very clear to me through some of our experiences and some of the wins that we had and how effective we became, that every company in the world is really going to have to figure out what the cloud means to their business and figure out the best ways to take advantage of it in order to remain competitive. So last September, through my partnership with AWS, we began to talk a little bit, and it turns out that Amazon had wanted somebody to also come talk to IT executives around the world about the journey that enterprises go on when they adopt cloud. So my role is really to talk to IT executives around the world, and it's less about my role is less about the kind of bits and bytes and the deep dives in the technology. We have lots of very qualified people like Chad and Miha to do that, and more about kind of the transformational change that happens at the organizational level. So I've been very, very excited and humbled to have the opportunity to meet with many executives here in Japan, and I've been in Asia for 3 weeks leading up to this week, as well as all around the world. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. So Chad, could you introduce yourself?
I'm Chad Woolf. I'm the Director of Risk and Compliance for Amazon Web Services. I've been with AWS for 5 years, and in that time built the AWS Compliance program, and engage regularly with customers to help them solve the compliance challenges when moving to AWS. Before that, I was at Ernst & Young for 12 years. It's a global accounting consulting firm where I specialized in security, IT process, optimization, and helped companies implement repeatable security processes to handle a wide range of security challenges. So I'm very happy to be here and Thanks for the invite.
Thanks, Chad. So last, Miha, please.
Thank you. So my name is Miha. I'm East European by origin, otherwise live in US. Actually working on IT modernization, I just started to calculate over 25 years. I'm one of those people that I'm lucky enough that actually I worked on IT modernizations from punch card mainframe systems, because in Eastern Europe we always got the technology way later than the Western world. But I went through at least 5 or 6 waves of IT modernization in the past. And last couple of years since I joined Amazon Web Services, very much, although we are now talking about very different and new environment, the modernization process, the IT transformation process is relatively similar. We need to look into the people, we need to look into the processes, we need to look into GRC, governance risk compliance, we need to look into the new technology stack, both from the architecture and platform perspective. In Amazon Web Services, my function as a principal architect, I am assigned to various either global or strategic accounts. I probably saw more migrations and IT transformations in the last couple of years, more than I'm willing to admit. So I hope that I can provide at least some of the insights in our hour of debate over here.
Thank you, Miha. So let's jump into the discussion about how enterprise company can adopt the AWS cloud. So we want to go through the process of the cloud journey. So let's start talking about the first step, which is why companies are considering using AWS and why they choose cloud computing platform. So Stefan, so you're former CIO of Dow Jones, so maybe you can start talking about why did you think about it?
Yeah, sure. So, when I started my cloud journey at Dow Jones back in 2012, there was a few reasons why we really wanted to look towards the cloud. One, we were spending way too much resources managing IT operations and infrastructure, and the expectations of the executive team and certainly of the customers of Dow Jones was that we were going to be spending more time delivering products. So that was one, and I think my point of view that I developed pretty quickly over my first few weeks while I was working at Dow Jones was that we were pretty bad at managing infrastructure to begin with, and there was several incidents and events just in my first few weeks on the job where my commerce platform went down because we ran out of disk space and missed an alarm for several hours. In another incident, we changed a firewall rule and we lost a whole data center in Hong Kong because it took 3 hours to recover because we didn't, connect the dots together. So I think, coupled with the fact that just the expectations of what the technology department should be delivering and frankly what technology departments are capable of delivering today, given how far technology has come versus what we were delivering, was way off. What we found throughout the course of our journey, which lasted several years and it was very much a learning experience all throughout, was that we were able to save money. We were able to greatly improve our security posturing across all of our systems. We were able to become much more efficient. At the end of the day, though, what the big benefit really was that we were able to go from, in my tenure, 70% of the resources in my department focused on IT operations and infrastructure management to 70% of my resources focused on product development instead. And I think, now over the last 8-9 months or so, I've had the opportunity to talk to well over 100 CIOs all over the world at this point, and I think that's the real key. And I think there's many reasons why why companies are brought into the cloud that compel them to do their first workload. It could be that they need to save money. It could be that they want better security. It could be that they want to go global. It could be that they want to move faster or become more agile. But at the end of the day, what it is really about is taking more and more of your resources and focusing on the things that are very, very important to the business.
Thanks, Stefan. So, Miha, so I think you also have a lot of experience in working with customers. So, from your views, what's the reason your customers start using cloud computing?
Thank you. So Stephen already laid out it pretty well. the way when we try to help customers to write down their business cases, we usually try to divide the value of the cloud very much into a very simple value engineering formula. We try to say value is coming, you have all the benefits minus all the detriments. And the detriments, of course, you try to lower, and benefits you try to increase. On a detriment side, we usually try to look into lowering the cost and lowering the risk. And that's exactly what Stephen said, that lowering the cost, we try to focus on consolidation, on actually getting to the right-sized amount of IT that you don't burn, wasted burning of IT resources when you don't need them, but also lowering the risk exposure and having the proper risk profile. We found out that very frequently, and probably Chad can talk much more about it, how cloud actually can lower the risk profile of a company instead of increasing it. On increasing the benefits, we usually try to source from two directions. One is increasing the speed, which is very regular, you can think about it, time to provision, time to market, idea to cash, how much can you shorten that time. But also increasing agility becomes extremely interesting from perspective that now modern IT using a cloud computing, you don't need to have that very strict, rigid, non-agile approach to planning and then capacity planning and then procurement and provisioning, and very much have a humongous amount of wasted time before a new system is actually provisioned. Whenever you want to do the change, how much of the change management is required. The modern environments that we are trying to build or help customers to build very much are always building a parallel environments, and when the parallel environment is production ready, we are just slowly switching the DNS over, and sometimes then we also keep the old environment as a fail-back scenario. So all of those, on a high level, again, just to repeat, you try to lower the cost, you try to lower the risk, but much more relevant it is you try to increase speed, and you try to focus on increased agility. Combination of those four, every customer gets a different blend of them, but that's that key magic combination that we see compels most companies to move to the cloud.
Thanks, Miha. So there's four components here. Maybe then we can talk a little bit about this security perspective, since Chad is here. So from Chad, from your view, even we sometimes see that even the highly regulated companies are thinking of using AWS because they wanted to lower the cost. So do you see any trend that in the industry, in the highly regulated industries like finance and pharmaceutical, and why they are thinking they're using AWS cloud?
Yeah, one of the great things about moving to AWS is, and I mentioned this in my last talk last hour, is the immediate uplift you get in security. I mean, you're not only getting an operational uplift of not having to deal with building a data center and procuring the resources for that, but also you get this immediate uplift in security. There's a lot of investment that goes on that we've made in our data centers, in the services that we're providing, and in the security capabilities that our customers have. So by using AWS, you immediately inherit a massive amount of investment in security. And you're actually increasing your capability of managing security and managing the complexity of that security by a great deal by moving to AWS. So that's the first thing. And I think the second thing is that, ever since the beginning of the security profession, we've been pushing to automate controls, to do prevent mechanisms, preventing attacks, enabling encryption, and doing things that will reduce the risk of your environment. And the way that AWS is deployed, where it's a software-driven environment, really does achieve a lot of those things that we've been talking about achieving for decades. And it hasn't, most companies and all the companies that I saw, the ability they had to manage security effectively was really limited to how much real talent they had on staff. And the number of people and the amount of budget they had to manage specific security initiatives. And with the onboarding of AWS, besides all this benefit of IT transformation and besides the benefit of quick go-to-market and idea to cash, is the fact that you're getting this immense security investment and immense security capability. And so I think that that's why, the cloud has been seen or is traditionally seen as a risky environment. Like, you're moving your data to the cloud. Wow, that's really risky. You better really be careful before you do that. But the reality is that the environment is more secure and can be a better controlled, better governed environment than on-premise, where everything isn't driven by software. It's distributed, and there's a lot of manual management required.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that, from my perspective as when I was a CIO, I wanted every possible opportunity to create the most secure environment that I could for my customers, for my company, for all the data that we had. And my point of view was, I knew that AWS was investing much more in securing its platform than I had, frankly, in my entire IT budget, let alone just in security. And when I think about, I'm a sports fan, and I think about a professional athlete would never go on the field without using the best possible tools at their disposal. They'd use the best equipment, they'd use the best tools or whatever. And that's not a substitute for talent and performance. They still have to bring their performance to the field, but they want every possible advantage they have. And as a technology professional, I felt the same way. I wanted every advantage and best possible chance I could to have the best security posturing I could, and I knew that AWS was my best chance at doing so.
Right, thank you. So let me summarize the discussion so far. 今はですね、実際
So far, in terms of how enterprise companies have decided to set on a journey for cloud, we have been discussing from the various notions from the three gentlemen. There are different perspectives that has been shed light on. But I think one of the key issues is not just to operate, but you like to move into the production of the IT, and most time being spent on those areas rather than O&M, and also the lowering the cost, and also increasing the agility and accelerating the speed, so that you'll be able to add on more value in your productivity. And lastly, in terms of security, as we have been discussing with our group, that actually there are a lot of limitations and compliance, and why cloud is being utilized in the very strict environment is that by utilizing cloud, the AWS secure sort of investment could be utilized as it is, and that is a great advantage. So due to these reasons, many companies are interested in taking on a journey to the cloud. So now, actually, the reason why cloud is being utilized has been tapped into. So now we'd like to drill down a little more in terms of how they will be implementing. And what are the case studies in terms of the application? What applications are running on the cloud? I would like to also tap into this area.
And let's talk about what kind of application exactly customers are using with the cloud. And also, what's the process or consideration point that customers need to think about in order to use the cloud. So, Miha, so why don't you start like from your experience with the customers, can you talk a little bit about what exactly customers are using with AWS?
Right. Let me try to. It's a very good question, by the way, because this is always one of the key aspects at the beginning of the planning. What can go to Amazon Web Services? What can go to the cloud? Initially, what we find out is that kind of divide the thinking into two parallel streams. One stream mostly needs to fit how do you do the integrated architecture between those two environments. You have an on-premises environment and then you have a cloud environment. You need to connect network connectivity with a proper security envelope and with a proper encryption of the channel. You need to put the authentication across it, so the systems in the cloud will authenticate in the same way as systems on premises. You need to decide and design all of the base services on top. For example, how are you going to provide high availability, disaster recovery, and all the common operational processes that always existed before in on-premises environment. Then the other stream usually starts with the application portfolio assessment, where if you don't have any other more complex criteria in mind, we usually recommend that customers start to look into two-dimensional space. How complex or complicated are applications versus how business critical they are. And when we start to discuss what are the different dispositions, where can you put which application in which method? Are you doing only rehosting? Are you doing replatforming? Are we doing complete rewrite? Are we dropping the application and actually try to find completely new equivalent in the SaaS world? So there are many, many different options, but the whole idea is that you create is usually quite large governance program that you need to put over it to decide for every larger application in the enterprise what is its disposition criteria and what is its right order. There will be some apps that might stay behind. There will be some applications that you might just retire. But at least in my experience, around 90%, 85% to 90%, and Stephen will probably give him specific examples from his case, you can find the migration path. What's the proper order? I would suggest that you start with not complicated and not business critical, so you can actually learn, you can build your muscle memory out from it, you can learn the migration tools. If you start with some super business critical and important application and you fail down the migration, it won't have a good implication for the rest of the cloud journey. So start with small and simple and have that progressive journey that you can actually go towards more and more complex and more and larger, more and more business relevant type of apps.
Yeah, so I would say that AWS has a plethora of services that are available that hit across just about every part of IT at this point. And I think that there are very few, if any, workloads. Certainly in my experience, there wasn't anything that I ran into where we couldn't find a way to architect it with getting some substantial benefit out of migrating it to the cloud. I would say where you start, to Miha's point, should be a little bit of a learning experience, but it should also be important enough that the organization cares that it succeeds, so it continues to get the momentum, but it should be driven by a need that you have at the time in your business. It shouldn't be something that you make up, right? And that need could come from anywhere. It could be, and we see this a lot, some new application that you want to develop and you want to make a cloud native application, and that's okay. But it could be that you want to, you have to refresh a bunch of hardware to, upgrade your SAP system. Well, it's a great opportunity to look at how you can get that SAP system to run in the cloud. It could be some other refresh event. It could be you want to add some features to an existing application, at which point you're going to use a little bit of services over here with AWS, implement some hybrid, have it talk to your data center. It could be you have a security or compliance need that needs to be met, and the cloud is much better suited to help you do that. So I think where you start should be driven by your needs at the time, and you start with something that is, you can start small enough where you can get some experience, and you want to start thinking in terms of weeks, not months and years. And as you build your expertise within the organization, and you ideally leverage some automation and other best practices when you're using the cloud, things will become easier and easier, and you'll be able to leverage, continuous improvement techniques to make your organization better and better over time, and be able to take on more and more complicated work as you and your team become better equipped to handle the work.
So it sounds like the key concept here is like starting from the start and iterate a lot of success, then jump into the more critical workloads. So do you have any ideas how they, compared to the waterfall model, so how the company should actually apply the Kaizen process or continuous iteration here? So could you, Chad, do you have any comments here or talking about?
Actually, Stephen's probably better at answering this question.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Kaizen or, fail fast is something that I hear a lot. And I kind of have a little bit of a different view than fail fast. I use the phrase sometimes, but really there's no failure when you're learning. And you might invest in an initiative or a project, and you might decide that product or business that you started off doing is no longer worth pursuing. And certainly I've had lots of experiences throughout my career where we've invested in some product or built something that nobody used, and we ended up not pursuing it any further. In fact, my first application that we built in the cloud in Dow Jones was something that we didn't end up pursuing longer term, but it did serve as a great educational project to get my staff well trained and interested and understanding the benefits that cloud can bring into the organization. So my point of view is, while the product and the service that we were developing perhaps could have been viewed as a failure, the Kaizen principle that we learned and we became much better off as an organization as a result of actually doing that, really made us a much stronger technology company. And I think I look back to that first project, and it served as an example to the more than 1,000 people in my staff of how things can be done in this world of the cloud and continuous improvement. And if you think about traditional ways of procuring and operating technology, you're waiting months before you get hardware in. Configuring it, something goes wrong, the infrastructure team gives it to the developers, it's not the way the developers want, so they work around it, and this goes back and forth and back and forth. And now you're up in seconds. And now you're constantly improving on something where you start at 60 miles an hour instead of starting from zero. So I think, I would say embracing as an organization a culture of continuous improvement and not being afraid to try new things, because if it doesn't work out, your organization is still going to be better off than it was before. And the next project or the next thing that you invest in, you'll likely be able to do much more quickly and effectively as a result.
Okay, thank you. So maybe we can talk more about continuous improvement as well as fail fast concept. So Miha, so why don't you talk a little bit about what your customers are actually doing, and in terms of the fail first concept?
Absolutely. One of the things when Stephen was talking, I remembered a couple of weeks ago when we did the assessment of a very well-known large brand in US. And they very proudly told me how very much they didn't have much of a failures in most of their recent IT progress in last, I think, 5-7 years. And my initial reaction was, well, obviously you didn't aim high enough. Because if you aim too low, you succeed each and every time. So you maybe need to start aiming much more bolder and higher and much more aggressive, either from time or scope or quality or whatever it is. The core reason for that, particularly when it comes to those new environments, is when you succeed in something, you did learn something. I agree with Stephen that these are all wonderful learning experiences, but failure will give you so much more lessons learned, because failure is always actionable. It kind of impacts us way more than a success does. So what I see that a good leadership in modern IT needs to create is an environment where failures are frequent and they are okay. Very much that you start injecting you create an environment where failures almost have to happen. And if I extrapolate that towards how does it actually work in a production, there is a whole new science out there. We call it a fault engineering, that is actually looking into how do we create faults in a production environment, this is a radically different way of thinking compared to traditional IT, where we are trying to avoid outages and faults for all costs. Now, instead of that, to actually tell to operations people that they should inject faults into environment regularly. They should try to, almost like you want to cause a micro earthquakes and make sure that the rest of the system starts to adjust to it, that developers need to become better, that operational monitoring needs to become better, that systems, before just blindly reaching out to a database, they need to actually check that database is still alive, that instead of just talking to another service and get response from a service, that you need to check that that service exists. And what do you do when those services are not there? So most of large modern cloud-based companies, Netflix would be one of them, also Amazon follows the same principles and a couple of others. We have a separate team, usually dedicated either in a networking or security collective. They will actually run continuous displacement of instances, or sometimes whole availability zones will disappear. Or in a worst case, what we call a Kong exercise from a King Kong, we displace the whole region. So a whole region goes to the ground. The rest of the regions need to detect, needs to reroute the traffic, needs to recompose, actually need to rehydrate the whole missing set of systems. And we are talking about tens of thousands of systems that suddenly disappeared because automation, a robot that injects faults, wipes the whole region full of systems out. So you need to re-replicate the data, re-replicate the instances, bring everything back. It is a big impact on a network, but you need to make sure that you slowly, gradually build that fail often and still thrive in a very never stable environment. You need to learn how to live in a constant earthquake zone. That's something you know very well over here in Japan.
Can I just make a comment?
Yes, please.
I think as I think about maybe some of you are security conscious or compliance conscious, where you realize that failing in the area of security and compliance is simply not an option. Failing fast works with with experimenting with new technology, but in some cases, you must proceed and use the cloud in a way that will cause you to not fail and never fail in some aspects. And security is one of those things. So in this realm, the great thing about using the cloud provider and using the advanced security capabilities is you can start experimenting in areas that you just never had any capability in doing before. So if you think about key management or disaster recovery. I mean, how many people here do backups to tapes? Can I just see by a raise of hands how many companies here you're aware of the backup to tapes, do tapes?
そう、この中で、テープでですバックアップを
So who is taking backup on the tape? Can you kindly show of your hands, show how many?
Tapes. I don't think I ever, in all my years of consulting and doing disaster recovery, background, business continuity type work, I knew almost everyone knew how to do backups, but nobody knew how to recover data from those tapes. So it's great you're doing backups, but when you actually need to recover, you can't do it. That's it makes doing backing up of tapes pointless if you can't recover. And so one of the great things and what drew me to come to Amazon was the fact that disaster recovery in the cloud is so much better, and you have so much more capability to do backups easily and recover from them if there is anything that goes wrong. it actually increases your ability to manage security and maintain compliance by tenfold, because you're getting a lot of this capability, and you're able to go from managing security at this level to managing security at a much higher level. And as you explore and experiment with that functionality and that tooling, snapshots, policies, CloudFront formation, or CloudFormation templates, and all these things that help you better manage a secure by default environment, those are the things that you can explore with as the business takes on the fail fast and experimentation. But you, as a security and compliance professional, can ensure not only can you maintain the level, but you're advancing your capabilities there by leaps and bounds.
I think one of the things that's really exciting about almost the combination of these two ideas, this is a phrase that I've been hearing and talking to a lot of customers about recently, is you go from this concept of disaster recovery to disaster indifference. And I think about all the money I've spent on disaster recovery systems, millions, maybe in my career, tens of millions of dollars I've spent on disaster recovery systems that I hope I never use. Right? They're sitting there, they're backed up, and if I need to use them, it means something's really wrong. And oftentimes every quarter we would run some experiment as to whether or not it was seamless and how quick it would work, all the effort that would go into that. And instead, you architect well for both security and compliance and optimize for the cloud, and you can become much more indifferent, using the fault injection. One of our crowning achievements, I think, at Dow Jones was we were running the Wall Street Journal and MarketWatch website load balanced between 6 regions all throughout the world, and we could scale up and down according to business hours in each of those areas, and we were only ever paying for the compute that we were using in each area. And if the East Coast in Virginia had disappeared, God forbid, in some disaster event, I would be upset, but our website would still be running.
So let me add to that. Stephen just reminded me it's really worth thinking about. In traditional IT, HADR was usually one discipline, right? High availability and disaster recovery. It was kind of both those were always part of a business continuity planning. What we actually got with the cloud is a very hard separation of those two. So for all of you architects out here in the room, high availability, it's very easy and natural to solve in cloud environment by using multiple availability zones or maybe using multiple regions, and you assure high availability of a service. Now, lots of architects are not aware that high availability does not solve your disaster recovery issues. Because disaster is not only geographical disaster. It doesn't mean that one availability zone will stop working. Most of the disasters that we see in a cloud, when they happen, they don't happen often, but if they happen, are actually data breach disasters, where you have to have a completely separate strategy to roll back to last known good. If you only have a great high availability story, and you have a hacker attack and some data is compromised, now you have a highly available, multiple replicated, dirty data. So you still need to have a disaster recovery as a separate strategy from high availability strategy. Just a good lesson that I had to learn the hard way myself.
Okay, so let me summarize some discussion here. 今ですね、実際にじゃあどのような形で
So actually, in terms of how the enterprises are introducing and deploying cloud, there was an issue about disaster recovery, how disaster recovery are realized on the cloud. Actually, in terms of the actual usage, starting off from that end. Well, a large application is not going to be run from the cloud, but it's a test, sort of a trial sort of basis where you are going to go through the learning process. So small trial, repeating them and replicating them. Then you go into this phase of learning them and accumulating the empirical learning. You'll be able to run on a large scale and also critical, of course, migration. So it's a continuous sort of a learning and continuous experiences that needs to be built up. And on top of that, the controlling the faults or maybe failures, you need to establish architecture that is robust in terms of resilience to the fault. There was a word called fault engineering, but let's say there's an instance and there's a failure and there is the whole region disappears. And against this fault, you need to have a resilience in order to cope with the situation. So Netflix and other companies are also engaging on some of these solution set. And there are some areas where you can share the fault, and there are areas which you should not share the fault. So security is something that we should not sort of give away on. So this is a DR which you should never be able to offer a way by means of offering a fault in the security. So now moving on to the next area, there are a lot of blockers in engaging on the journey of cloud. So what are the blockers and how you need to overcome the blockers is the area that I would like to seek the insight from each area.
Right now, so we discussed about what's the value the cloud what's the value of the cloud computing for the enterprise customers, and then how they start using cloud. So we would like to talk a little about what's the blockers for the enterprise to adopt the cloud and how they overcome. So maybe the security is the most popular blockers we are often here. So Chad, why don't you start from the blocker?
Okay.
You see.
Security and compliance is sometimes thought of as a blocker, at least something that needs to be resolved before you can start using the cloud. And that's generally the case, especially if you're doing regulated workloads or you're in a regulated industry. You're going to need to at least do your due diligence. And that's really what the essence of what needs to be done. You need to do your due diligence and apply some governance over the cloud environment. If you're going to use it in a broad scale, you need to apply governance. And it's not so much a blocker as it is something that needs to be done in order for everything else to progress. But the key thing is that this needs to be done at the very beginning. There's security and compliance due diligence, a way to create an environment that's secure by default and that complies with policies. This is done generally at the beginning, and then as it's operated over time, you're operating the security, you're operating testing controls, you're doing security operations. That kind of thing is an ongoing thing that you would normally do anyway. But the due diligence is done at the beginning, along with the legal due diligence, and then things are authorized, maybe vendor due diligence. They're doing an assessment of us as a vendor, and then moving forward, it's not a recurring event of constantly addressing this as a blocker, but it is something that needs to be done at the beginning, and then going forward, it's leveraging the security and technology that we provide.
I would say that security it's an opportunity in the cloud, and I think oftentimes, as Chad suggested, it can be viewed by some as a roadblock in the beginning, but that's a very simple thing to overcome, and this is just facts and education and understanding the right way to implement your systems in a way that would meet your security and compliance needs. And I think that unfortunately sometimes people get a little caught up in that when that's not even really what's going to be the biggest challenge. And if you're an enterprise or you're a big company and you've been in business for a long time, you're used to doing IT in a particular way that you've probably done for years or decades even. In my case, Dow Jones, 125-year-old company. And to me, the change, it's not a technology issue. The technology is there. It can do what you need it to do. It's more about, evolving your culture to be able to take full advantage of everything that the cloud has to offer. And I think you start small, you grow your experience, and you build and you build and you build over time. But the biggest challenge will be making sure that everybody in your company, both your staff in technology, but also other executives and your business counterparts and everybody else, understands why you're doing what you're doing and can get educated and trained on all the things that they're going to need to start doing a little bit differently to really take advantage of it. And that's when we talk about this journey of starting with executive support, educating your staff, experimenting, working with partners, implementing a cloud center of excellence, working on hybrid architectures, and ultimately becoming cloud first. And I think more of your time will be spent on making those investments, which ultimately are going to will pay off in huge ways. But it's generally getting people over the fear of the unknown. And my advice is to do that with training, education, and by the way, we're all very much here to help with that in any way we can. So I think sometimes I feel like I see a lot of companies get stuck planning in the beginning, and whether it's because they have anxiety around security or governance or whatever. And I think that's unfortunate because the benefits are real and they can happen very quickly if you just try it.
So, Miha, do you have any additional comments here?
I wouldn't talk so much about blockers. And I think that what I heard and I agree with are mostly inhibitors. What inhibits the most optimal path towards full usage of cloud computing? And there are very much three things that I heard and I fully believe. People, and people, right? It is all in properly preparing, educating, creating that wave of need to change. One of the key problems that I see with most large enterprises, they think that the only thing that changes is technology. Everything is changing. Everything can change with the adoption of a cloud. Processes become way softer, leaner, and you can measure them way faster. Automation, you can't use the same type of the automation you used in a traditional data center and just bring it over and you think that this is just another environment. We did the same type of modernization 27 times before in our careers. It's just another. This is something that is really fundamentally, dramatically different. And educating that in advance, one of the key inhibitors, coming back to your question, key inhibitor is if you are not aware of all the different ways that people learn. Some people learn by listening. This conference is actually a great learning opportunity. Some people learn by reading. Some people learn by doing. So in your organizations, in order to prepare people and actually drive a very successful change management program, you need to provide all of the modalities, all of the possible ways to educate your staff. Security people need to get different training from DevOps training, from training about the modern architectural patterns, from trainings of and maybe observing other use cases, how other enterprises or other organizations did it. But preparing the mental mindset that we are now moving into a world where IT is now ran by tiny little functions, and we are talking about tens of thousands of functions that all talk to each other relatively autonomously, that IT is no longer few well-defined systems. We are going towards the world of massive armies of kind of drones in the cloud that are, when you start to think or listen about Internet of Things, it is just another step that we are all going forward. If I'm looking in the way how at Netflix we manage the whole fleet of virtual machines, we treat them as Internet of Things. We don't treat them as a traditional computers. So in order that mentally we get to that state is a very big, it's almost like a generational shift that we start to think about IT as a very organic, fluid, multi-cell organism. And then change development process, change deployment process, change operational process. Everything has to change. But first we start with people.
Thank you. 今ですね、ブロッカーの話をしてきましたけれども、よくある。
Right, we are talking about blockers. The first question that we often get is the security. That could be the blocker. That's where we started from. But the security is the first hurdle that we need to clear. And it's not a big issue because we can cover that by the technology. What we need to overcome the most is the culture. And we need to have a good optimal training and education for that. Now we would like to change gear. So these enterprise users adopting and using the cloud, what will be the role of the partners like the system integrators? And how can they help the enterprise users? So let me ask the questions to the panels.
And let's start talking about that role of partners. So as you know, end users are start using cloud computing, and then in many cases partners are involved, especially in the Japanese IT market. The systems integrator played a major role for the cloud journey. So could you talk a little bit about how the partners, especially consulting partner, can play a role in the cloud journey? So Stephen, can you start?
Yeah. So there is an awesome opportunity in front of everybody who considers themselves a system integrator, a partner, or sort of in that community, to build an incredible business today, and there will be for many, many years to come. I think we know for sure at AWS that we will not be able to grow this business to its full potential without the help of a large and vibrant partner ecosystem. And we have a robust program around working with partners and having them certified and working closely with us to make sure that they're helping everybody from startups to small medium businesses all the way through to the largest enterprises take advantage of the cloud in a really meaningful way. And I would say I work with a lot of the big partnership, a lot of our big partners in particular as it relates to the enterprise market, since that's my area of focus. And the piece of advice that I always give to this set of partners and SIs is that you really got to consider what your areas of focus are going to be. And I think it's very easy just to say, well, we're going to take any business that we can get in the cloud market. And I think that's okay, but it's probably better if you say, here are the 5 use cases that we're going to do really well, or here are the 3 industries that we're going to build high competencies in and know really well and help companies who sit these industries, or whatever it may be, and build up competencies and experience in those areas, educate AWS on what those are, and we can then send you fully qualified leads based on those things and work together to make sure that your products and services are positioned properly in the market. And like I said, I think if I wasn't doing what I'm doing today, I might be starting my own business as an AWS partner. I think there's the potential is it's incredible. I mean, the demand for cloud services in the market globally is growing everywhere. And I've been all around the world in the last 3 or 4 months, and everywhere I've been, the appetite is only increasing. So you've come to the right place.
Okay, how about you, Chad? So do you have comments here?
Yeah, from my perspective, from a security and compliance perspective, the partners play a very key role, and in some cases provide a service that we don't easily provide to customers. And I think pharma is probably the best example of that. There's a few pharma partners we have that take the building blocks of AWS and frame them up and put them in some kind of in an application or a platform that is easily ingested and easily used by pharma, life science customers. They add in some specific compliance capabilities that we don't provide, but they are really good and specialize in, and as they provide that to this industry, and they're more intimate with the industry, and here in Japan, obviously the partners here that serve Japanese customers, you understand the culture better, you understand how it can be used and how services can be procured and deployed and things like that. So it's those kind of things that really the partners really play such a key role, and there's a wide range of scenarios that particular value can apply to. So anyway, I've just really been happy with the partners that we have, and they're such great partners in a true sense of the word that enables the use of these great building blocks of AWS to be used in all different lenses and all different kinds of industries.
Okay, how about you, Miha?
Cloud creates huge amount of opportunity for partner regardless of the size. So definitely, let me walk down the life cycle and you will see as a partner where all of the work and value add can be provided. At the beginning, in a strategy phase, definitely lots of customers are asking us, and we can't provide all of the strategic guidance, particularly when it comes to the question, which cloud is right for me, or to which cloud do I put which workload, or what is the right sequencing and ordering. All of the strategy forming and shaping is extremely well-defined advisory consultancy business. Going over to analysis after the strategy is set, analyzing the current state and comparing with the future state and defining the gap analysis and actually building a very high-level planning, it's also very, very value-added job that helps remove that kind of a lack of clarity. It creates a very clear path to execution for a customer, and we need lots of partners that can help to create that clarity down to almost to the task level to say, well, you are here today, you want to be over there in a year, and this is how we properly segmented that journey just for you. Then going into implementation, so those two first tasks are all the planning part, right? If you're looking at the old COBIT plan, build, run phase. In the building phase, we definitely need help to design the right complex architectural and implementation patterns. And that also includes, so designing and building and testing, all of that goes in, particularly partners that already embrace the microservice architecture, that already embrace the way how modern cloud-based services should be created on top of our platform. Going into integration, integrating one service with other services, either your own or with default generic services coming from the platform, or maybe integrating with services provided by other organizations, maybe Twitter, Facebook, or anything like that. So the whole integration space is now extremely rich and also lucrative from perspective of work, high complexity work that can be achieved to actually create very, very interesting use cases. And then going into the run phase, where definitely operations, managed operations on top of the cloud is something that all managed service providing partners are very happy to provide. If organization, for example, Amazon Web Services, we will not patch your instances. We don't have access to your instances. We can't do any of traditional managed service providing tasks directly on your platform. We need help for all of the customers that were historically either outsourced or they don't want to do that themselves. So the whole layer of help desk, service management, all of the things that historically were there, we need partners that can help. And the last part in the life cycle is improvement. We do need help to go inspect environments and check with the customers as a validator and say, are you well architected? Are you secure enough? Are you running in the most optimized environment? Can we improve something? Can we create an independent checking and try to find whatever Kaizen continuous improvement project we can have, so you can start back at the beginning and improve the strategy, go through design, and so on. So big partners, system integrators will cover the complete life cycle. But it's ideal that this small world you can go and do any micro partnering and still be extremely successful.
Thank you. それではですね、最後のですね、締めくくりのクエスチョン、
So last but not least, last question that I would like to ask is that a message. We'll would like to conclude the session by getting a message from each one of you.
give a quick comments to the audience here in Tokyo.
Yeah. So I would say we're still at the very beginning. And I did talk about how far and how broad and how deep, frankly, our the AWS services are and how they can help across every part of your business. That being said, we're still investing very heavily in growing and improving the business, both in terms of how we work with partners and growing that, but also in terms of the services, in terms of the regions we operate. We're far from done in being in all the places where we'd like to be, over the coming years. So, I think Miha just said day one. I think it's true. We're still very early on, and there is a lot more that you're going to see. Chad had a slide of our pace of innovation, and it's almost doubled each of the last 4 years. And this year already, it's intense. And there's so much stuff that goes on in AWS. Even myself, who has access to most things that happens in the business, I have trouble keeping track of it all. So that's going to continue, and it's going to continue to get more intense. And I would say in the great words of Nike, just do it. Don't overthink it. Try something, and prove to yourself. Don't take my word for it. Prove to yourself that there's some pretty substantial benefits, and that it is in fact a much better way to do your work and business.
Okay. So how about you, Chad?
I guess I hope the takeaway that you bring away from this, this day and this panel, is that you can operate and own and maintain a more secure environment in AWS than traditional on-premise. I think that goes against what maybe a lot of people expect the cloud to be, but that's the reality. If you really look at functionality, capability, the services that we're providing, the advanced capabilities we're giving you in managing security, the uplift of the investment we've made, it really does give you a lot of more power to manage this crazy threat landscape of the current IT environment. So I just would encourage you to really, with an open mind, look at that at face value, and as you do that and experiment with the functionality and experiment with the security features that we have, you're really going to see some dramatic improvements. And we've seen that in many customers. Most of our customers, as they do this, they really see a dramatic uplift almost immediately. And so I'd encourage you to give that a chance, and really, as Stephen was saying, just do it and start iterating on advancing your security skills and capability.
I would say if you compare how we talked about cloud, let's say 5 years ago, and it was lots of ruminating about why cloud is good. Now in 2015, probably the only question that we usually ask around is why not cloud? So shift of the discussions that we have now, and obviously it will be more and more so, you need to start thinking what are all of those reasons that either keep you in the traditional IT world or all of the reasons that push you forward in that innovation train that we are sitting on. We are battle tested. We actually proved through years that we can run very much any imaginable workload with all of the right either compliance, risk, security assessments and validations. If you are here, that's already at least your first, I hope it's not your first step, but definitely I almost feel like we are here preaching to the choir, right? We are already trying to persuade people that already made that decision to go to that journey. So thank you to be with us and congratulations for the beginning of the journey.
Right, thank you. 最後までですね、ご清聴いただきましてありがとうございます。
Well, thank you very much to stay until the very end of the session. We'd like to conclude this panel. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
以上をもちましてエンタープライズ企業はいかにクラウド化の流れを進めるべきかを終了とさせていただきます。